Now, it goes without saying that we don't need video games, as they are ultimately a luxury product. They can be nice to have though, as they can bring about some fantastic experiences that nothing else can. The thing is though, there comes a point where enough is enough. People tend to stereotype me as the guy who hates everything video game related because of my opinions, and because of my standards. But I think those people assume that because I hate the industry, and seemingly have mostly negative opinions on video games, that I hate video games. But if that was the case, I wouldn't have an entire blog and YouTube channel dedicated towards video game related content. It's pretty obvious that I love video games, but I also love being critical of them. That's just the way I am. I will trash on the things I love regularly. It's not because I don't enjoy the game at all, quite the contrary actually. It's because I enjoy the game way too much, to the point that its shortcomings start to unravel as I invest more time into it. Then I get frustrated by those problems, and start cursing the game I enjoy for having them. Now in theory, this is what sequels are supposed to be, a chance to improve upon one's predecessor by fixing its problems and bringing something new to the series to alleviate boredom. Now there are many examples of sequels that do this, and do this well. Many of my favourite games of all time are sequels for this reason. Valkyrie Profile 2 Sulmeria got rid of the facade of freedom that the original game provided, and became considerably more streamlined in its progression, at the expense of having more linearity. The linearity wasn't a downside however, as to get the A ending in the first game, you pretty much have to follow a predefined path somewhat anyway, as the game punishes you for acting freely. Valkyrie Profile 2 drastically altered the combat system from the first game, but it still maintained the original concept, albeit in a completely different form. Sequels like Valkyrie Profile 2 tend to be more controversial, but they can also be some of the best, most innovative games out there. Then you have sequels like Dynasty Warriors and Samurai Warriors, where it's basically the exact same game again, but with some improvements and a few new additions. These are the opposite of games like Valkyrie Profile 2. They don't strive to change things up too drastically and play it safe. This mentality appears to be more prevalent nowadays, particularly in regards to more mainstream AAA games, and this kinda ties into the reason why we don't really need the gaming industry anymore. Now I know everyone has their own opinion on this, but if you ask me, gaming peaked in the 2000s, and has only gotten gradually worse since. This is obvious to the people who have followed me for a long time, as I've ranted about modern gaming a lot, but at the same time, what sort of games do I actually find myself playing nowadays? Well, if you take a look at the kind of games I've reviewed on this channel, you will realise that most of them are PlayStation 2 games. Yep, you guessed it, I've been playing a lot of PS2 games. Even after over 20 years of gaming, there's still so many PS2 games out there for me to play, and that's before we even start with systems that existed before the PS2, like the Super Nintendo and the PC Engine, to name a couple of examples. There are so many games out there that most people have not and never will play because they aren't passionate enough about gaming to seek these games out for themselves. The entire PC Engine library might as well be considered an example, as most people outside of Japan didn't grow up with the PC Engine, and in an era where people can now play fan-translated versions of these games, you would think that now would be the perfect time for people to play them. And believe it or not, people are doing just that. Heck, a lot of people are going back to play old games that they missed out on growing up, and discovering experiences they wish they knew about as children. In fact, that has been the majority of my gaming experience as an adult. Because as a kid, I was broke and couldn't afford to buy video games, so I usually had to rely on parents to get me them. So even though I grew up with the PlayStation and the PlayStation 2, I barely played any of the games on those systems as a kid, as I had to pick and choose what games I had, because I couldn't afford to buy games the way I can now as an adult. Therefore, I stuck with the safest choices, the franchises that I was mostly familiar with, those being Final Fantasy and Pokemon. As an adult though, the games I experienced have been so much better than the games I experienced as a kid, and very few of those games have actually got released in my adulthood. They were mostly games that released when I was a child that I simply did not know about, and in some cases, not really old enough to fully appreciate. Games like Shadow Hearts, for example, handle mature themes that my child brain would not be ready for, but as an adult, I loved every minute of it. Name a game that came out in the past decade that is anything remotely close to being like Shadow Hearts. Oh wait, you can't, because there isn't one. I suppose there's Penny Blood in the works, but that ties into my next problem. You see, having played all three of the Shadow Hearts games and Kudelka, I've kinda had my fill of it. They were fantastic games for sure, but do I really need to play a blatant imitation of them? Not really. The beauty of those games was what they were at the time. They were unique. They fascinated me. Does Pennyblood fascinate me? Well, I'm not entirely sure. It depends on whether or not it actually brings something new and fresh that interests me. A lot of games nowadays try to imitate the games of yesterday, which is something I brought up in my derivative game design theory crafting video, but do we really need those imitations? The question really got me thinking, and ultimately led to an even greater question. Do we even really need more video games? At first this was a tricky question, as there's always the possibility of finding yet another diamond in the maze of mediocrity, but at the same time, whenever I look at my collection of games, I feel pretty content with my gaming experience. Not to sound arrogant or anything, but I really feel like I've experienced enough to the point that I don't really need to experience any more games. While I do understand why some people still have the desire to hunt for diamonds, given the fact that my taste in games is so complicated, it's often not worthwhile for me to seek them out, as chances of me finding something I absolutely adore gets lower and lower the more I hunt for them. And that's because the well is drying up. I have been playing so many PlayStation 2 games that the list of games on the system that I would personally enjoy and haven't played yet is beginning to thin out. And it did get me wondering, would I move on to more modern consoles after the PlayStation 2? Then I remember what modern games are like and how detached I have become from modern gaming. It feels like a completely different world to me. The thing about older systems is that they tend to have games from all kinds of genres that I can get into, particularly because of how much effort the developers put into making the games feel larger than life. F-Zero GX, for example, is more than just a racing game. It's an entire world, an entire universe, it's a mindset, it's a religious belief, it's a way of life. I mean, sure, it's just a game where you casually break the laws of physics every millisecond as you race across complicated racetracks, but it offers so much for a game so simple at its core that it's an unforgettable experience. Then you play games like Redout, which don't even have half of the features F-Zero GX had. No vehicle creation, no story mode, no lore, no interesting characters. It just feels empty. In fact, that's how a lot of indie games feel. Very empty and hollow. Though the same can be said for AAA games nowadays. Now, sure, you have the occasional banger like Star Rush and the Divine Force, which continues to remind me just how brilliant Tri-Ace are as a development team. I swear to God, Gotanda and Masaki Norimoto are beyond insane. I mean, they have to be to have kept their franchise's quality strong for this long. Regardless, it goes without saying that Valkyrie Elysium would be the very thing that I come to expect from modern gaming. Soulless, mediocre slop. But that's what happens when you hand over one of Tri-Ace's most important works of art to a bunch of amateurs to reboot. It was Ninja Theory's take on Devil May Cry all over again, just less funny and more dull. Eventually we will have to deal with the fact that even Tri-Ace will either lose its way or fade away, because nothing lasts forever. Developers are people too, and like Sakurai mentioned in his videos, game developers sometimes move on to other things and leave the company, sometimes even the industry, which can be a huge blow for the franchises they worked on. With that in mind, even developers like Tri-Ace can fall apart overnight, but thankfully, in my opinion, they've still got it. However, not every company is like Tri-Ace. Many companies like Tale Worlds fail to understand what made their original game so great to begin with, and end up creating a sequel that is a mess of ideas that just don't work well together to create what might as well be considered a downgrade of a previous game in almost every single way besides graphics. Granted, a lot of that is due to the efforts of the modding community, but it says a lot when a commercialised game fails to live up to the calibre of fan-made projects. Then you have games like F-Zero 99. Oh boy, I did not want to bring this game up, but I just have to. What an embarrassment of a game that is. F-Zero fans deserve so much better than this garbage. I mean, I'm personally content with F-Zero GX regardless, but this game is not only a downgrade, it's a straight up insult. Nintendo are basically using the F-Zero name as a cash grab to convince people to sign up for their monthly subscription bullshit in order to access it. And they think so little of F-Zero fans that they will use the F-Zero IP as bait for idiots who will throw money at Nintendo for anything they charge for. It's bad enough that this online paywall exists in the first place, but the fact that Nintendo has used F-Zero 99 as a means of marketing its paywall has completely devalued the F-Zero IP. The sad thing is that I reached a point where I didn't even want a new F-Zero game, but the fans kept on begging and begging for their new F-Zero game, and here it is. It's a piece of fucking shit. There you go, fanboys. Eat up the shitty, F-Zero game you all begged for as I move on to other IPs that haven't been ruined yet by greedy companies. As you can tell, I am one hell of a cynical gamer, and you know what? I think all of this pretty much justifies the end of gaming. Now that's not to say that people should stop playing video games, of course not. But this industry can go die in a fire for all I care. All it does is shovel feces in our faces 24/7 and begs us to buy their garbage like they're fucking Oxfam. And when you do, they anally rape the shit out of your wallet with DLC, microtransactions, battle passes, season passes, and to top it all off, the game will require an internet connection to run. Just so that the developers can ban people trying to add modded content into their game that they wanted to charge for via microtransactions because fun isn't allowed anymore. I'm looking at you 2K. So if the gaming industry disappears, all of these shitty mainstream journalists will finally have to find a job at Burger King because no new releases are out. Big Twitch streamers will cry rivers because nothing is trending anymore, so they can't steal everyone's attention away from the smaller content creators playing more niche games. Game developers will have to find other jobs, which sucks, but at the end of the day they are a victim of a flawed system, and like all systems, when they fall apart, the people at the bottom always take the fall, as those greedy sons of bitches that run these big corporate publishers find yet another stupidly high paid job the next day. Really shows just how unfair life truly is, doesn't it? Ultimately though, the people who actually play video games for fun won't really suffer at all from the demise of the industry. It's just another Tuesday really for most people, as some of them are still putting thousands of hours into one game and still having fun. So why can't you? Why do you need to consume to enjoy gaming? Is consumption even fun, or is it a means to an end? Personally, I think it's the latter. I consume to play games, not for the sake of consumption. If I wanted to consume for the sake of consumption, I'd go to a restaurant and consume delicious food, not video games. Bad video games are worthless to me. Good video games are what I live for, so why keep buying all the garbage released today when I can enjoy what I already have? We don't need more video games, people. The industry needs us. We don't need them. When will I get this into your fucking heads, fanboys? Why do you defend these companies so much when we don't even need them? Sure, we need gas companies to keep warm in winter, and we need farmers to produce us food to eat. We don't need video games. They're a luxury, goddammit, and it's because they're a luxury that I refuse to sell for mediocrity. Make games good or go fuck yourself.